Those four
I take
words
you to
would
be my
change
husband.
everything.
I take you
But
to be my
Cordelia
wife.
Ashworth
You may
didn't
now
know
kiss
that
the
yet.
bride.
Right now, she only knew the weight of silk against her skin, the crushing grip of whalebone stays, the cold cathedral air that smelled like incense and old money, and the slow death of hope. 22 years old and she was being sold. The thought circled her mind like a vulture. Not married, not courted, sold. Like livestock at auction. Like furniture at estate sale. Like any other commodity that could settle a debt. But let's go back. Let's go back 3 weeks to the night it all began. To the moment Cordelia learned exactly what she was worth to the people who were supposed to love her. The tenement building on Hanover Street sagged like an old drunk. 5 stories of brick and broken promises wedged between a butcher shop and a tavern that never closed. The Ashworth family occupied 2 rooms on the 4th floor, 2 rooms for 5 people, 2 rooms that smelled like boiled cabbage and desperation and the particular sour odor of poverty that no amount of scrubbing could erase. It was a Tuesday night when Cornelius Ashworth came home with the news. Cordelia heard him before she saw him. The uneven footsteps on the stairs, the way he caught himself on the railing, muttering curses at ghosts only he could see. The distinctive sound of a man who'd spent his afternoon in a bottle looking for courage he'd lost 20 years ago on a battlefield in Pennsylvania. She was at the stove stirring a pot that held more water than vegetables, trying to make 3 potatoes and an onion feed 5 people. It was an equation that never worked, but she tried anyway. Because that's what she did. She tried, she sacrificed. She made the impossible work through sheer force of will and an empty stomach. Her sister Rosalind was in bed coughing. That wet, terrible cough that had been getting worse for 6 months. The kind of cough that sounded like drowning from the inside. Like lungs filling with something that shouldn't be there. The kind of cough that required medicine. Medicine that cost money they didn't have. Money that was always needed somewhere else. For rent, for food, for Jasper's debts. Her brother Jasper was supposed to be studying. Instead, he sat by the window staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much too soon. His books had been pawned 2 months ago. Gambling debts, cards and dice, and the desperate hope that this time luck would smile on an Ashworth. It never did. Luck had abandoned this family the day Cornelius came back from the war with a medal for valor and a bottle for everything else. The door opened. Cornelius Ashworth stumbled in, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He'd been a tall man once, strong, a soldier who'd stood at Gettysburg and lived to tell about it, who'd pulled wounded men from burning wagons, who'd done something brave once in a moment of chaos and cannon fire. But the war had taken something from him that never grew back. Whatever piece of a man holds him upright, holds him together. Now he was just tall, just standing, just barely. Their mother Margaret rose from her chair like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Her face was stone, her hands were fists. She'd been beautiful once or so, the wedding portrait suggested. Now she was just hard. Hard lines around her mouth, hard eyes that calculated worth and found everyone wanting. Hard hands that had worked laundry and floors in other people's houses until they were as rough as tree bark. We're finished. Cornelius collapsed into the only chair they owned that didn't wobble. His coat was stained with things Cordelia didn't want to identify. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something deeper. Something that lived in his bones now. The debts, I can't pay them anymore. They're coming for everything next week. The furniture, the rooms, all of it. Cordelia's hand stilled on the spoon. She'd known things were bad. She'd known for months. But knowing and hearing are different things. Knowing is theoretical. Hearing is the edge of the cliff. Hearing is the moment before the fall. How much do we owe? Her voice was steady. She'd gotten good at that. At sounding calm when her heart was trying to climb out of her throat. At being the reasonable one. The strong one. The one who didn't get to fall apart because everyone else already had. $15,000. The number landed like a boulder in a still pond. $15,000. It might as well have been 15 million. It was a sum so far beyond their reach, it existed in a different reality. A reality where people wore silk and ate meat every day and didn't have to choose between medicine and rent. Margaret's eyes shifted, calculated, landed on Cordelia like a hawk spotting prey. How old are you now? The question hung in the air like smoke, like a noose. 22, Mama. Still unmarried. The words were an accusation, a judgment, a reminder that Cordelia had failed in her most basic duty as a daughter. She should have married years ago, should have brought in a dowry, should have been useful instead of burdensome, should have understood that her purpose was to be currency in her family's desperate economy. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. The expression she wore when she was about to do something she'd rationalize later. That's the problem right there. You should have been married off when you were 18. Could have brought in decent money. But no, you wanted to wait. You wanted love. The mockery in her voice was sharp as broken glass, sharp enough to draw blood. Cordelia felt something crack inside her chest, a small fragile thing that had still believed her mother might choose her over necessity, that had still hoped for kindness, for understanding, for the kind of love that didn't come with conditions and calculations. What you want doesn't matter anymore. Margaret turned to Cornelius. Tell her about the arrangement. Cornelius wouldn't meet Cordelia's eyes. He stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else, like they'd done something he couldn't quite remember but couldn't quite forget either. Senator Ambrose Blackthorne has agreed to take you as his wife. The spoon clattered against the pot. The sound was too loud in the sudden silence. Senator Blackthorne. Cordelia's voice came out smaller than she intended. Younger. Like the girl she'd been before she learned that fairy tales were lies and mothers could sell their daughters without blinking. Because she knew that name. Everyone in Boston knew that name. Ambrose Blackthorne. Railroad magnate. Political powerhouse. The man who'd built half the city and owned the other half. The man who moved through society like a shark through water. All teeth and appetite in the absolute certainty that everything he wanted was his for the taking. The man whose wives kept dying. He's willing to pay off all our debts. Cornelius's voice was hollow, empty. The voice of a man who'd made a deal with something dark and was trying not to think about what it would cost. Give us enough to start fresh. Get Rosalind the medicine she needs. Set Jasper up properly. Give your mother and me a chance to live without this weight. From the bed, Rosalind coughed. The sound was like tearing cloth, like something vital coming loose inside a small, fragile body. Cordelia looked at her sister. 10 years old, skin like paper stretched over bird bones, eyes too large and a face too thin. Rosalind, who used to run and laugh and dream of being a dancer. Rosalind, who was drowning in her own lungs while Cordelia stood by, helpless. Rosalind, who deserved medicine and care and a chance at life. Rosalind, who would die without money. How much? Cordelia heard herself ask. Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. $15,000, plus another $5 for the wedding and setting you up properly. The number fell like a stone into still water. Ripples spreading outward, changing everything. $20,000 total, enough to save them all, enough to clear every debt, enough to give Rosalind a chance at life, enough to send Jasper to school, enough to keep her parents fed and sheltered for years. All it would cost was Cordelia. I can't marry him. Her voice shook, but the words were clear, definite, the last stand of a woman who was about to lose. Please, there has to be another way. There is no other way. Margaret's face hardened into something that might have been granite if granite could feel contempt. Do you think we haven't looked? Do you think we haven't tried everything else? This is survival, Cordelia. This is what you do when you're drowning. You grab whatever's offered, even if it's made of thorns. Cornelius finally looked up, and Cordelia saw it in his eyes, the thing that made her blood turn to ice water. He'd already spent the money. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough. Enough that backing out now would be worse than going through with it. Enough that they were committed. Enough that her fate had been sealed before she'd even been told about it. You'll marry him in 3 weeks. Margaret's voice was final. Absolute. The voice of a woman who'd made hard choices and would justify them until her dying breath. The arrangements are made, the contract is signed, you'll do your duty to this family. From the corner, Jasper stood up, 13 years old, trying to look like a man, trying to find some courage he didn't feel. Why does Cora have to fix your mistakes? His voice cracked on the words, breaking between boy and man. You're the one who gambled away everything, old man. You're the one who borrowed from the wrong people. Why should she pay for it? Shut your mouth, boy. Cornelius lurched to his feet, swaying like a tree in a storm. You think you're a man now? You want to talk about mistakes. You're the reason we're in this deep. Your debts, your stupid bets, your absolute certainty that you were smarter than everyone else. Stop it, both of you. Cordelia stepped between them. The movement was instinct, protection. The role she'd played her whole life. The bridge, the buffer, the one who smoothed things over and absorbed the blows and made sure everyone else stayed intact even if she shattered in the process. It's fine, I'll do it. The words came out calm, steady, like she was agreeing to do laundry instead of selling herself to a monster. If it helps Rosalind, if it keeps us from losing everything, I'll marry him. Margaret's face softened, just for a moment, just enough to remind Cordelia that this woman had once been capable of kindness, Once before poverty and desperation had worn her down to nothing but sharp edges. You're a good daughter, Cora. Her voice was almost gentle. This is your duty. Your sacrifice will save this family. You'll understand someday. When you're a mother, when you have to make impossible choices, you'll understand. But late that night, when everyone else was asleep, Cordelia sat by the window. She looked out at the narrow street below, the gas lamps flickering like dying stars, the shadows moving between buildings like secrets that couldn't find rest. The city that had never felt like home and now felt like a prison. She thought about running, just disappearing into the darkness, walking until her feet bled, finding some other life, some other future. Anything but this. Anything but becoming the fourth wife of a man who collected women like trophies and discarded them like trash. But where would she go? She had no money, not even enough for a train ticket out of the city. No skills beyond reading and sewing and keeping house. Nothing that would translate into survival on her own. No connections, no power, no options that didn't end with her starving in a gutter somewhere. And if she ran, Blackthorn would take it out on her family. Men like him always did. Men with that much power and that little conscience. They punished resistance, made examples, ensured that everyone knew the cost of defiance. Rosalind would die without the medicine. Jasper would end up dead in some alley, unable to pay his debts. Her parents would be thrown into the street. All because Cordelia chose herself over them. So she sat, and she watched the night, and she felt the cage closing around her one bar at a time until there was no space left to breathe. The next morning, a package arrived, large, wrapped in cream-colored paper, delivered by a man in livery who looked at their building like it might contaminate him. For Miss Cordelia Ashworth, from Senator Blackthorn. Margaret took it with trembling hands, not from fear, from anticipation, from the knowledge that this package represented $20,000, represented salvation, represented everything they needed. She made Cordelia open it in front of everyone. Inside was a dress. Cordelia lifted it from the box with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. White silk that caught the light like water. Lace that must have cost more than her family made in a year. A veil so fine it was almost transparent. The kind of veil that was meant to symbolize purity, innocence, willing submission. It fit perfectly. Of course it fit perfectly, because Senator Blackthorn had had her measured 3 days ago, when she didn't know, when she thought the man visiting their building was just another debt collector. He'd studied her, evaluated her like a horse he was thinking of purchasing, measured her waist and hips and bust with eyes that saw only utility. The thought made her skin crawl. Try it on. Margaret's voice was eager, almost girlish, like she was living vicariously through this wedding, through this silk and lace and the illusion of upward mobility. Cordelia wanted to refuse, wanted to throw the dress out the window, watch it flutter down to the street below and land in the mud where it belonged. But Rosalind was watching, eyes bright with fever and something that might have been hope. You're going to look so beautiful, Cora. So Cordelia put on the dress. Let Margaret fuss with the hem and adjust the sleeves and talk about what an honor this was. What a blessing. What a stroke of fortune that a man like Senator Blackthorn would even look at a girl like Cordelia. The dress felt like a shroud, like something designed to wrap a corpse, to make death look pretty, to disguise the violence of what was happening with enough silk and lace that people could pretend it was something other than what it was. A sale, a transaction, a sacrifice. You look like a princess. Rosalind's voice was full of wonder. Cordelia looked at herself in the cracked mirror that hung on their wall, saw a stranger staring back, someone who looked like she belonged in a different world, a better world, a world where white dresses meant joy instead of surrender. Thank you, Rosie. Her voice came out steady. She'd gotten good at lying. The days passed in a blur of preparations. Blackthorn sent more packages. Gloves, shoes, undergarments that cost more than Cordelia's family spent on food in a month. Each one a reminder that she was being outfitted, prepared, made suitable for her new role. And one evening the senator himself came to visit. Cordelia was given no warning. Just suddenly there he was standing in their cramped rooms, making the space feel even smaller with his presence. Ambrose Blackthorn was 38 years old. Not handsome but not ugly either. Medium height, graying hair that he styled to hide the worst of the thinning. A face that might have been pleasant if it didn't wear that permanent expression of entitlement, of absolute certainty that the world existed to serve his desires. He looked at Cordelia the way a man might look at a new coat, assessing the cut, the fit, whether it would serve its purpose. Miss Ashworth. His voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a man who'd learned to weaponize charm. You're looking well. The dress suits you. Thank you, Senator. Cordelia forced the words out through numb lips. Won't you sit down? Have some tea. Margaret was practically vibrating with eagerness, desperate to impress, to prove that despite their poverty, they had manners, had breeding, had something worth the $20,000 Blackthorn was spending. The senator sat, accepted tea in a chipped cup, made polite conversation about the weather and the upcoming wedding and how he was looking forward to having such a lovely bride. All while his eyes traveled over Cordelia like hands, measuring, claiming, anticipating. I've had the West Tower prepared for you at my Newport estate. He said it casually, like it was a gift, like he was offering her something wonderful. Very private, very secure. You'll find it quite comfortable, I'm sure. All the amenities a wife could want. Cordelia felt ice forming in her stomach, because she'd heard about the West Tower, had read about it in the newspaper reports of his third wife's death. Isadora Sterling, that had been her name before she married Blackthorn, the daughter of Governor Thaddeus Sterling, a beautiful young woman who'd married the senator 6 months after the governor's wife died, who'd lived in the West Tower, who'd been found at the bottom of it 3 months later. Overdose of laudanum, ruled a suicide. But the whispers said different, said she'd been terrified, said she'd begged to leave, said the last time anyone saw her, she had bruises on her wrists that looked like fingerprints. That's very kind of you, Senator, Cordelia heard herself say. Blackthorn smiled. The expression didn't reach his eyes. I believe in taking care of what belongs to me, and you will belong to me, Miss Ashworth. Legally, absolutely. You understand that, don't you? His hand reached across the table, covered hers. His palm was damp, his grip too tight. A wife has certain duties, certain obligations. I'm sure your mother has explained them to you. Yes, Senator. The lie came easily. Good, because I have certain expectations, certain requirements, and I don't tolerate disobedience. His fingers tightened, just enough to hurt, just enough to make his point. But I'm sure we'll be very happy together, as long as you remember your place. He released her hand, stood, smiled at Margaret like nothing had happened. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Ashworth. I'll see you all at the cathedral. And then he was gone. Cordelia sat very still, looking at her hand, at the red marks his fingers had left, at the future written in those marks. That night she made a decision. If she was going to die in the West Tower, she was going to know why. She was going to understand what she was dying for, who had died before her. She was going to find out everything she could about Ambrose Blackthorn's dead wives. The cathedral was magnificent. St. Mary stood on Beacon Hill like a monument to everything Cordelia would never be. Stone and stained glass and soaring arches that seemed to reach for heaven with the desperate hope of the damned. The pews could hold 1,000 people. Today they held 500. 500 witnesses to her execution. Cordelia stood in the preparation room staring at her reflection in a mirror that was probably worth more than her family's building. The dress made her look like someone else, someone refined, someone who belonged in this world of silk and gold and carefully arranged power, someone who wasn't screaming inside. Her mother worked on her hair with efficient hands, pinning, twisting, creating an elaborate architecture of curls and ribbons that would take hours to undo. That would give Blackthorn something to destroy on their wedding night. You look beautiful. Margaret's voice was soft, almost tender, like a real lady, like you were born to this. Cordelia said nothing. She was looking at the veil that would cover her face, hide her expression, turn her into a symbol instead of a person, make it easier for everyone to pretend this was normal, natural, right. Rosalind had been allowed to come despite the doctor's protests. She sat in a wheelchair near the door wrapped in blankets despite the June heat. Her face was pale, her breathing labored, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been happiness. You're my hero, Cora Bear. Her childhood nickname, the one she hadn't heard in years, the one that reminded Cordelia of a time before everything fell apart, before their father drank and their mother hardened and their brother gambled and Rosalind got sick. I love you, Rosie. Cordelia knelt beside the wheelchair, took her sister's small hand, felt how fragile it was, how breakable, how this girl deserved to live, deserved the medicine and care that $20,000 could buy. I know. Rosalind's voice was a whisper. That's why you're doing this. But Cora, you don't have to. If you want to run, I'll understand. I'll tell them you had to, that it was my fault for being sick. Don't. Cordelia squeezed her hand. Don't ever think that. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. A knock at the door, sharp, authoritative. It's time, Miss Ashworth. Mrs. Grimshaw's voice was like iron scraping stone. The housekeeper entered, tall, gray-haired, eyes like chips of flint. She wore black. She always wore black, like she was in mourning for something. or someone. Your father is waiting to walk you down the aisle. She stepped closer. So close Cordelia could smell camphor and something medicinal, could see the lines around her mouth, the hardness in her expression. A word of advice, girl. Her voice dropped. Just for Cordelia, just between them. The senator has rules, very specific rules. Follow them exactly and you might last longer than the others. Break them and, well, the West Tower is very high and the rocks below are very sharp. She smiled, thin, terrible. Welcome to your new life. Then she swept out. Cordelia felt the room tilt. The walls seemed to close in. The air was too thick to breathe. This was real. This was actually happening. In less than an hour, she would be married to a monster, would belong to him, would be trapped in the West Tower with no escape except the rocks below. Her mother placed the veil over her face. The world turned white and distant, muffled. There, perfect. The cathedral bells began to ring, deep sonorous notes that vibrated in Cordelia's chest, like a funeral dirge, like a countdown to the end. Her father appeared in the doorway. Cornelius Ashworth in his Sunday suit that smelled like mothballs and desperation. His face was ashen. His hands were shaking. His eyes couldn't quite meet hers. Cora, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, little bird. The old nickname broke something in her, made tears sting behind her eyes, but he took her arm anyway. They walked through the halls of the cathedral, past portraits of saints and martyrs who'd died for their faith, past candles flickering like small desperate prayers, past everything beautiful and holy and utterly powerless to save her. The doors to the nave opened. The organ began to play. Wagner, the wedding march, the same music that had played at Blackthorn's previous weddings, the same music that would play at his next one after Cordelia died. 500 faces turned to look at her. Through the veil, Cordelia could see them. All those people in their fine clothes, whispering behind gloved hands, judging, pitying, entertaining themselves with tragedy. The poor girl marrying the senator, give her 3 months, maybe 6. She'll end up like the others, like Amelia, like Catherine, like Isadora. The aisle stretched before her like a road to nowhere, like a path she'd read about in a book once, the one that led to a dark forest, to a witch's house, to something that looked safe from a distance but was built on bones. At the end of it stood Senator Ambrose Blackthorn, 38 years old, not young, just there, existing, taking up space and oxygen in Cordelia's future. He wore a cream-colored suit, expensive, perfectly tailored, the kind of suit that cost more than Cordelia's family would see in 5 years, the kind that was designed to make him look distinguished, powerful, worthy. He was smiling. That smile made Cordelia's blood turn to ice, because it wasn't joy, it wasn't happiness, it wasn't even lust, though, that was there too. It was possession, ownership. The smile of a man who just acquired exactly what he wanted and was already imagining all the ways he'd use it. Her father's hand on her arm was the only thing keeping her moving. Step, step, step. Each one felt like walking toward her own grave, toward a hole in the ground with her name already carved on the headstone. They reached the altar. Cornelius placed Cordelia's hand in Blackthorn's. His palm was damp, his grip immediately too tight, claiming. Her father muttered something that might have been a blessing or might have been another apology. Then he fled, actually fled, back to his seat like a coward who couldn't watch what he'd done, what he'd sold his daughter for. Blackthorn's hand tightened around Cordelia's, his thumb pressed against the bones. A reminder, a warning, a preview of what was to come. He leaned close. His breath smelled like wine and something rotten, like meat that had been sitting too long in the sun. You look lovely, my dear. His whisper was for her alone, intimate, invasive, like a bird in a cage, all silk and trembling. I do enjoy birds, especially when they sing for me. Cordelia tried to pull her hand away. His grip tightened until pain shot through her fingers, until she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Now. His voice stayed quiet, controlled, but underneath was steel, was the promise of violence barely restrained. We haven't even said our vows yet, and you're already trying to fly away. That won't do. That won't do at all. He leaned even closer. I thought we discussed this. You belong to me now. Your family made sure of that. Every coin I paid, every debt I cleared, all of it means you're mine. My property. My toy to play with however I choose. The priest cleared his throat. An old man with kind eyes, who probably believed this was a real wedding, a real union, a real choice, who probably thought he was performing a sacrament instead of participating in a sale. Dearly beloved, his voice echoed through the cathedral. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate instituted by God in the time of man's innocency. The words washed over Cordelia like poison. She wasn't listening. Not really. She was thinking about the tower, about the three women who'd stood where she stood, who'd worn white and smiled and promised forever, who'd believed maybe that they could survive, that they could endure, that somehow it would be okay, who'd ended up broken on the rocks below. Marriage is a sacred covenant, a joining of two souls, a bond that cannot be broken by man. Blackthorn's thumb pressed harder against her hand, a pulse of pain with each word. If there is anyone here who knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Of course there was silence. Who would dare speak against Senator Ambrose Blackthorn? Who would risk his wrath, his power, his carefully cultivated vengeance? He owned half of Boston, controlled the other half. One word from him could destroy careers, ruin lives, make people disappear. The priest continued, "Do you, Senator Ambrose Blackthorn, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do." His voice was strong, clear, the voice of a man who always got what he wanted, who'd wanted three women before this and gotten them, who'd used them up and discarded them and moved on to the next. The priest turned to Cordelia. "Do you, Cordelia? Margaret Ashworth, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse." Cordelia opened her mouth, tried to speak, tried to say the words that would seal her fate, that would trap her in the West Tower, that would start the countdown to her death. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed. Her body was refusing. Some primal part of her was screaming, "No, no, no," was trying to save her from herself, from duty, from the sacrifice that would kill her as surely as the rocks below the tower. The priest waited, patient, kind. Blackthorn's fingers dug deeper into her hand, hard enough to leave bruises, hard enough to make her gasp behind the veil. "Answer him." His voice was quiet, still controlled, but underneath was steel, was threat, was the promise of pain so much worse than this if she didn't comply. "Answer him now, girl, or I'll make sure your family regrets every breath they take. I'll make sure Rosalind dies slowly, painfully, without medicine. I'll make sure Jasper ends up in a gutter with his throat cut. I'll make sure—" Cordelia tried again, forced the word past her frozen throat. The cathedral doors exploded open. The sound was like a cannon blast, like the hand of God reaching down to stop something unholy. Ancient oak slamming against stone with enough force to shake the windows, to make the chandelier sway, to cut through the organ music and the priest's voice and Blackthorn's whispered threats. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Every breath held. Even the priest froze his book still open to the marriage vows he'd been reading for 30 years. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a military uniform but wrong. Too many medals, too much gold braid, too much everything. This wasn't army. This wasn't navy. This was something else. This was power made visible, authority incarnate. The entire cathedral went silent. And then, like a wave rolling across the ocean, people began to kneel. First the nobles in the front rows, then the merchants and landowners, then everyone else, dropping to their knees like dominoes, like subjects before a king, like believers before a god. Within seconds, the only people still standing were Cordelia Blackthorn and the priest, and the figure in the doorway. He began to walk down the aisle. His boots struck the stone floor with measured, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed like a judge's gavel, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable, like the march of fate itself. As he came closer, Cordelia could make out more details through her veil. Dark hair silver at the temples, not gray with age, silver with stress, with responsibility, with the weight of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. A face carved from granite, strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, gray eyes that seemed to see everything, that seemed to look through pretense and eyes and straight into the truth of things. This was a man who commanded armies, who made kings nervous, who answered to no one but himself and maybe God. Someone whispered the title like a prayer, like an invocation. The governor. Another voice trembling with something between awe and fear. Governor Thaddeus Sterling. Blackthorn's face had gone from its usual ruddy color to pale in seconds. He released Cordelia's hand, actually released it, took a step back, like he was trying to create distance, like he was trying to pretend he hadn't just been threatening her, claiming her, treating her like property. Your Excellency. His voice cracked slightly. We weren't expecting that. Is you honor us with your, this is quite silence. Sterling's voice cut through Blackthorn's babbling like a blade through silk. The single word carried absolute authority, the kind that didn't need volume, didn't need repetition, just existed and was obeyed. He stopped 3 paces from the altar. His eyes moved from Blackthorn to Cordelia and back again, assessing, judging, seeing things that made his expression grow colder with each passing second. The priest found his courage first, or maybe his confusion. Your Excellency, we are in the middle of a sacred ceremony. If you would like to take a seat, we would be honored to have you witness. I would not. Sterling's gaze fixed on Blackthorn, and there was something in that look, something personal, something beyond duty or law, something that looked like hatred refined into its purest form. Senator Ambrose Blackthorn. The name was spoken like a curse. You stand here today to wed this woman. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Blackthorn tried to straighten, tried to reclaim some dignity, some of the power he wielded in Boston's back rooms and smoke-filled parlors. Yes, Your Excellency, with all proper contracts signed, under the full authority of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, all legal, all proper, all under what authority? The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Blackthorn blinked, confused, off balance. I don't understand, Your Excellency. The authority of the church, the authority of the law. All proper procedures were followed. The bride's father consented. The contracts were signed. Everything was done according to, were they? Sterling took another step forward, closer, into what might have been considered a threat if there wasn't an altar between them. Tell me, Senator, did you inform this woman of the blood debt her family owes to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Blood debt. Blackthorn's confusion seemed genuine, which only made Sterling's expression grow colder. Your Excellency, I know of no such. I investigated the family thoroughly. Their debts, yes. Their circumstances. But no mention of any. No. Sterling's voice was ice. Of course you don't, because you never bothered to investigate who you were purchasing. You saw a poor girl from a poor family, and you assumed that made her available. That made her yours for the taking. He reached into his coat, pulled out a rolled document, heavy paper, multiple wax seals, the kind of document that was meant to last, to be incontrovertible, to carry weight that time couldn't erode. You assumed wrong. He held the document up so the entire cathedral could see, so every witness could understand that what came next wasn't arbitrary, wasn't personal, was backed by law and precedent and the kind of authority that couldn't be argued with. This is a legal covenant dated August 12, 1863, signed at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, witnessed by 3 federal officers and sealed with the authority of the Union Army under the provisions of military honor debt. He unrolled it slowly, like a prosecutor presenting evidence, like a judge reading a sentence. It states that Cornelius Ashworth, having saved the life of Captain Thaddeus Sterling at mortal risk to his own person, and with no expectation of reward, is hereby granted a blood debt under the old laws of military service. Under the laws of honor and federal statute 740, any firstborn daughter of Cornelius Ashworth is bound to the protection of Thaddeus Sterling and his heirs in perpetuity. He looked directly at Blackthorn, and in that moment Cordelia saw it, saw the hatred, the history, the personal vendetta wrapped in legal authority. She cannot be sold, cannot be traded, cannot be married without explicit written permission from the holder of the debt. His voice dropped to something cold, something dangerous, something that promised consequences beyond law. That would be me. Blackthorn's face was going red again, the color of rage barely contained, of humiliation in front of 500 witnesses, of plans unraveling. But that's, Your Excellency, this is highly irregular. What authority does a 22-year-old military contract have over current civil proceedings? The law has evolved, marriage law specifically. A contract from the battlefield surely doesn't supersede. What's irregular, Senator? Sterling's tone remained calm, but there was an edge to it now, like ice cracking under pressure, like the moment before an avalanche. What's irregular is you attempting to acquire property that belongs to the Commonwealth. What's irregular is you trying to circumvent laws that have stood since the founding of this nation. What's irregular is you standing here in front of witnesses in the house of God and attempting to complete an illegal marriage. He turned to the priest. This ceremony is void. Under the authority vested in me as governor of Massachusetts and executor of this blood debt, I declare these proceedings null and terminated. The priest looked like he wanted to argue, Looked like he wanted to defend the sanctity of his church and his ceremony and his authority. But he was staring at Thaddeus Sterling, at the man who appointed judges, who signed legislation, who could make or break careers with a word. He closed his book. As you command, Your Excellency. Blackthorne finally found his spine, or maybe his desperation. This is outrageous. His voice echoed through the cathedral, loud, angry, entitled. I paid good money for this. I cleared her family's debts. $15,000. I have signed contracts. Legal contracts between myself and Cornelius Ashworth. You can't just... Your contracts are worthless. Sterling's tone suggested he was bored with this conversation, tired of explaining obvious things to stupid men. You'll be compensated for any legitimate expenses. The debt clearance, the wedding preparations, all of it. The Commonwealth will make you whole. Anything beyond that is your own problem. He stepped closer to Blackthorne, close enough that Cordelia could see her would-be husband flinch. Actually flinch. This man who'd threatened her family, who'd left bruises on her hand, who'd smiled at the thought of owning her. He was afraid. And Senator, Sterling's eyes were ice, pure ice, the kind that burns. If you ever attempt to contact this woman or her family again, I'll make sure you understand exactly how much power a governor wields in his own state, how many ways there are to destroy a man without ever breaking a law, how thoroughly I can dismantle everything you've built, how completely I can erase you. A pause, heavy with meaning. Am I clear? Blackthorne's hands were shaking, with rage, with fear, with the humiliation of being publicly unmade, of having his plans destroyed in front of everyone who mattered. Crystal clear, Your Excellency. The words came out strangled. Good. Sterling turned back to Cordelia. She realized she was still standing at the altar, still wearing the white dress, still veiled, still frozen in the moment before everything changed, before her life split into before and after. Come with me. It wasn't a request, it was a command. But his voice had gentled, just slightly, just enough that she could hear the difference between how he spoke to Blackthorne and how he spoke to her. He held out his hand. Cordelia stared at it, stared at the man who had just torn apart her entire world, who'd destroyed the plan that was supposed to save her family, who'd taken away the $20,000 they desperately needed. Your family will be taken care of. Sterling spoke quietly, as if reading her thoughts, as if he could see the panic in her eyes even through the veil. All debts cleared. Your sister will receive the best medical care available in Boston. Better, I'll bring in specialists from New York if necessary. Your brother will be enrolled at Harvard. Full scholarship, room and board, everything. And your parents will receive an annual stipend to ensure they never have to sell their children again. He waited, patient, certain. Why? Cordelia's voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse, from shock. Why would you do this? Because your father saved my life once. Sterling's expression softened, just slightly, just enough that she could see the man beneath the authority. 22 years ago at Gettysburg, Cornelius Ashworth pulled me from a burning ammunition wagon. I was 20 years old, a captain, convinced I was invincible. I would have died in that fire, burned alive or blown apart when the powder went up. He pulled me out, saved me. He met her eyes through the veil. I made him a promise that day, a blood oath, that I would protect his family, that I would honor the debt I owed him, that no matter what happened, no matter where life took us, I would ensure his children were safe. His voice was quiet, certain. I always keep my promises. Cordelia looked at his hand, strong, steady, offering something she couldn't quite name. Rescue, yes, but also something else. Something that looked like choice, like agency, like the possibility of a future that wasn't the West Tower. Then she looked at Blackthorne, at the man who would have locked her away, who would have used her, who would have broken her like he'd broken the others, who would have smiled while he did it. She made her choice. She took Sterling's hand. His grip was firm, not painful, steady, strong. The kind of grip that said he wouldn't let go, wouldn't let her fall, would hold on even if she wanted to run. He led her down the aisle, past the still kneeling nobles, past her shocked parents, her father's face white with something between relief and guilt, her mother's calculating, already trying to figure out what this meant, what advantage could be gained, past the priest who looked like he'd witnessed something beyond his comprehension, past all 500 witnesses to her almost wedding. The cathedral doors stood open. Sunlight streamed through like a blessing, like proof that the world still existed outside this stone prison. Outside, a carriage waited, black, enormous. 6 horses, all midnight, black with white stars on their foreheads. Footmen in Sterling's livery, dark blue and silver. Everything screaming power and wealth and a different kind of danger. Sterling helped Cordelia into the carriage. His movements were surprisingly gentle for such a large man, like he understood how fragile she felt, how close to shattering. He climbed in after her, closed the door. The world narrowed to this space, this moment, this man. A moment later, the carriage lurched into motion. Cordelia sat across from him, her wedding dress taking up most of the space, her veil still in place, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. "Where are you taking me?" "To my estate in Newport, Sterling House." His voice was calm, matter of fact. "You'll be safe there." Safe. The word came out like a laugh, hysterical, unhinged. The sound of someone who'd been wound too tight for too long finally snapping. Safe from Senator Blackthorne, perhaps. But what about safe from you? Sterling's expression didn't change. He'd probably expected the question. Probably had his answer ready. "I'm not Blackthorne. I don't break things for pleasure." A pause. "But you do break things when necessary." It wasn't a question. He acknowledged this with a slight nod, honest at least. "But you're not something to be broken, Miss Ashworth. You're something to be protected. That's the promise I made to your father. That's the promise I'll keep." The carriage rolled through the Boston streets. People stopped to stare, to point, to whisper. The governor's carriage. Who's inside? Where are they going? What happened at the cathedral? Cordelia pulled off her veil. The fabric felt suffocating, constricting, a reminder of what she'd almost become. "I don't understand any of this." Her voice was raw, scraped hollow. "My father never mentioned saving anyone's life. Never mentioned any blood debt. Never mentioned you. And I would have remembered. I would have known if we had some connection to the governor of Massachusetts. Your father probably doesn't remember." Sterling watched her with those gray eyes, steady, unflinching. "He was very drunk that night. We all were, if I'm being honest. It was after the first day of battle, the worst day, when we realized the war wasn't going to be quick or easy or anything like what we thought. Men cope with horror in different ways. Your father's way was a bottle." He paused, remembering something he'd probably tried to forget. He stumbled into a burning supply wagon. Later, he told people he was looking for something to loot. Maybe that's true. Maybe he just wanted to see fire that wasn't coming from Confederate rifles. Either way, he saw me trapped under a collapsed wheel, pinned, with powder kegs all around me starting to catch. He should have run, any sane man would have, but he pulled me out instead, dragged me to safety seconds before the whole thing went up. Saved my life. Sterling's jaw tightened. I doubt he even realized who I was at the time. The war was chaos. People did heroic things and forgot about them the next day. But I didn't forget, and when I became governor, I made it my business to keep track of his family, to make sure I could honor my debt when the time came. "So you've been watching us all these years." Cordelia felt something between gratitude and violation. The idea that this stranger had been tracking her family, knowing about their poverty, their struggles, their desperation. Someone needed to. His voice held no apology. "Your father is a weak man, Miss Ashworth, a foolish man who made bad choices and dragged his family down with him. But he performed one act of genuine courage in his life, one moment of selfless heroism. That earns him protection, even from himself." The city gave way to countryside, rolling hills covered in late spring green, forests thick with oak and maple, stone walls dividing property that had belonged to the same families for generations. The landscape of old money, old power. The carriage moved fast, the horses eating up the distance with practiced ease, taking Cordelia farther and farther from everything she'd ever known. She stared out the window. Her family, her neighborhood, the narrow streets and crowded tenements, the life she'd been born into, all of it falling behind her, becoming memory, becoming the past. She was wearing a wedding dress, sitting across from the most powerful man in Massachusetts, heading toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. "What happens now?" Her voice was small, lost, the voice of someone who'd had their entire world rearranged and was trying to find solid ground. "Now you learn what it means to be under the protection of the governor of Massachusetts." Sterling leaned forward slightly, his expression serious, intent. "You'll live at my estate. You'll be educated, trained, given everything you need to survive in a world that eats women like you alive. Women like me, women who are too kind, too self-sacrificing, too willing to throw themselves on the altar for others." His gaze was intense, penetrating. "That ends now. Under my roof, you learn to fight, to think strategically, to be dangerous, to never again be in a position where marriage to a monster is your only option." "I don't want to be dangerous," Cordelia whispered. "I just want to be free." Freedom without power is an illusion. Sterling sat back, his expression softened slightly. You'll understand that soon enough. Freedom means nothing if you can't defend it, if you can't protect yourself, if you're always at the mercy of men with more strength, more money, more authority. Real freedom requires teeth, requires the ability to bite back. He gestured at the passing landscape. I'm going to give you those teeth, Miss Ashworth, whether you want them or not. The sun began to set, orange and red bleeding across the horizon like a wound. The landscape changed from familiar to foreign, from known to unknown, from the life Cordelia had lived to whatever came next. She watched it all pass by, her old life disappearing into the distance like something that had happened to someone else, to a different Cordelia, one who existed before this day, before this moment, before everything changed, and tried not to think about what waited ahead. Tried not to wonder if she'd just traded one cage for another. Tried not to ask herself if Governor Thaddeus Sterling was her savior or just a different kind of monster. She was too tired for questions, too overwhelmed for fear, too everything. So she sat, and she watched the sunset, and she let the motion of the carriage lull her into something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't quite awake either, a fugue state, a between space, where the past was gone and the future hadn't arrived, and all that existed was the movement, the wheels turning, the horses running, the distance growing. And across from her, Thaddeus Sterling watched and wondered if he'd made the right choice, if saving this girl was honor or selfishness, duty or desire, if keeping his promise to a drunk soldier on a battlefield 22 years ago was going to save Cordelia Ashworth, or destroy them both. Sterling House appeared on the horizon as full darkness fell. It wasn't a house, it was a declaration. 3 stories of weathered gray granite that looked like it had been carved from the bones of the earth itself. Tall windows that caught the moonlight like mirrors. Columns that wouldn't have been out of place on a Greek temple. Gardens that rolled down to the Atlantic like a carefully choreographed dream of how the wealthy lived. And beyond it all, the ocean. Endless. Unchanging. The kind of beauty that made you feel small and significant all at once. The carriage passed through iron gates that could have held back an army. Actually could have. Because this wasn't decorative ironwork. These were functional gates, heavy, thick. The kind designed to keep things out, or keep things in. Guards stood at attention. Not servants pretending to be security. Guards, real ones. Men with military bearing and eyes that tracked movement like predators. They wore Sterling's colors dark blue and silver, but they carried themselves like soldiers. Like men who knew how to kill and wouldn't hesitate if ordered. Cordelia felt the weight of their stares as the carriage rolled past, assessing her, categorizing her, determining if she was threat or asset or something else entirely. Welcome to Sterling House. Thaddeus's voice held a note of something she couldn't quite name. Pride, perhaps, or warning, or both. The most secure estate in Massachusetts. Nothing gets in or out without my knowledge. It looks like a fortress. Cordelia's voice was barely above a whisper. It looks like power, he corrected her gently. And now it's your home. The carriage stopped in a circular drive, the kind where dozens of carriages could queue up for a party, where wealth displayed itself through sheer excess of space. Servants materialized from nowhere. A dozen of them, all in perfect uniforms, all moving with synchronized efficiency that spoke of intense training and stricter discipline. They weren't hired help scraping by. These were professionals, career servants who'd chosen this life and excelled at it. But when Thaddeus stepped out, they froze, stopped their choreographed movements, bowed. Not a casual nod, a real bow, formal, respectful, bordering on reverent, like subjects before a king. He turned back, offered his hand to help Cordelia down. She took it. The wedding dress made the descent awkward. Too much fabric, too many layers, too everything. She stumbled slightly on the last step. His hand steadied her, strong, sure, keeping her upright. This is Miss Cordelia Ashworth. His voice carried across the courtyard, pitched to reach every servant, every guard, every person within hearing. She is under my direct protection. Anyone who harms her, disrespects her, or fails to meet her needs will answer to me personally. A pause, heavy with meaning, with the kind of threat that didn't need elaboration. Is that understood? Yes, Your Excellency. The response was immediate, unified, absolute. The sound of people who understood exactly what that meant, who knew what answering to Governor Sterling personally entailed, who had no intention of finding out. An older woman stepped forward, tall, thin, sharp features softened by intelligent eyes and the kind of competence that only came from decades of practice. She wore black, but it was elegant black, expensive black, the kind that spoke of authority rather than mourning. Your Excellency, Miss Ashworth. She inclined her head, respectful but not subservient, a professional greeting a professional, or at least greeting someone she'd been told to treat as one. I am Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper. We've prepared the East Wing for your arrival. The East Wing. Cordelia heard herself ask, heard the question that had been building since Sterling mentioned her rooms, since he'd made it clear she wasn't going to a tower, wasn't going to a prison, was going to something else. Not a tower, not a prison, a wing. Mrs. Pemberton's expression warmed slightly. Just a degree, just enough to suggest that she knew what Cordelia had escaped, what tower she'd expected to end up in. The finest rooms in the house, miss. Governor Sterling insisted you have the best we could offer. Privacy, comfort, everything you might need, and a view of the ocean. He said you might appreciate that, the sense of endless possibility. She gestured toward the house. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters. They entered through doors that were probably older than Cordelia's entire family tree. Carved oak, thick enough to stop bullets, beautiful and functional and intimidating all at once. The entrance hall was 3 stories tall. A chandelier hung from the ceiling like a frozen waterfall of crystal and candlelight. Portraits lined the walls, men in military uniforms spanning centuries. Women in silk gowns from eras when silk meant real power. Generations of Sterlings staring down with expressions ranging from stern to amused to utterly bored with the whole business of being important. Cordelia felt like an intruder, like someone who'd wandered into a museum after hours, like she was going to be caught any second and thrown out for not belonging. They climbed a sweeping staircase, the kind designed for dramatic entrances, for beautiful women in beautiful gowns descending while men watched and wished and wanted. Cordelia's wedding dress whispered against the steps. Still beautiful, still expensive, but now just a costume, a reminder of what didn't happen. They turned down a corridor lined with windows that overlooked the gardens. Even in the darkness, Cordelia could see the shapes. Careful landscaping, intentional beauty, money turned into living art. Mrs. Pemberton stopped in front of carved double doors. Your rooms, Miss Ashworth. Rooms, plural. She opened the doors. Cordelia stepped inside and felt the world tilt. A sitting room that could have held her family's entire tenement. Furniture that looked like art. Not functional seating, but carefully crafted pieces that belonged in galleries. Bookshelves lining one wall floor to ceiling, filled with more leather-bound volumes than Cordelia had seen in her entire life. Windows overlooking the ocean where moonlight painted a silver path across the water. And beyond, through another set of doors, a bedroom. The bed was massive, 4-posted, draped in silk that probably cost more than Cordelia's father earned in a decade. Enough space for 4 people, maybe 6. The kind of bed that made a statement about wealth and comfort and the vast distance between how the rich slept and how everyone else did. There are clothes in the wardrobe. Mrs. Pemberton moved through the space with practiced ease, lighting lamps, drawing curtains, making the rooms feel lived in rather than staged. Everything in your size. Governor Sterling had you measured. She said it casually, like it wasn't invasive, like it wasn't proof that Sterling had been planning this, had known somehow that he'd end up bringing Cordelia here, had prepared for it. A bath has been drawn in the adjoining room, still hot if you'd like to wash. Dinner will be served in Governor Sterling's private study in 1 hour, unless you'd prefer to eat in your rooms. No one would fault you for wanting privacy after the day you've had. She paused at the door, her expression softening further, becoming almost maternal. Welcome to Sterling House, Miss Ashworth. I think you'll find it quite different from what you've known. Different from what you were expecting. Different from anywhere you've been. A beat. And may I say, on a personal note, I'm glad the governor acted when he did. Senator Blackthorne is, well, let's just say you're better off here. Much better. Then she was gone, door closing softly behind her. Cordelia stood in the center of the sitting room, still in her wedding dress, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 8 hours, trying to understand how she'd gone from standing at an altar about to marry a monster to standing in a palace belonging to a man she'd never met until he destroyed her wedding. This morning, she'd been about to become Senator Blackthorne's 4th wife, his next victim, his toy to break. Now she was standing in a palace, being told she was under the protection of the governor of Massachusetts, being offered clothes and baths and dinner and safety. It was too much, too fast, too everything. Her legs gave out. She sank onto one of the beautiful chairs, felt tears start, not from sadness, not from relief, just from sheer overwhelming everything. The day crashed down on her all at once. The wedding, the terror, the interruption, the carriage ride, the covenant, the promises, all of it. She cried until she couldn't anymore, until there was nothing left, until she was just empty and exhausted and completely spent. Then she stood, stripped off the wedding dress, left it in a pile on the floor like the shed skin of someone she used to be. She bathed in water that smelled like roses, water that was actually hot, hot water, in a tub large enough to swim in, with soap that lathered instead of just sitting there like a lump, with towels so soft they felt like wearing clouds. She dried off, found the nightgown Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned, put it on. It fit perfectly, because of course it did, because Sterling had had her measured, had planned for this, had known. She should have been angry about that, about the presumption, the invasion of privacy, but she was too tired, too wrung out, too grateful for clothes that fit, in water that was hot, and a bed that was soft. She lay down, just for a minute, just to rest her eyes, and fell immediately into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too soft, the room was too quiet. The air smelled wrong, like fresh flowers and sea salt instead of cabbage and unwashed bodies. Then memory returned. The wedding, Sterling house, her new life, or not life, her new, what captivity obligation. She didn't have words for what this was. Someone had left a tray on the table while she slept. Coffee still warm, toast with butter and jam, eggs, bacon, fruit she didn't recognize. Enough food for 3 people, or one person who hadn't eaten properly in months. Cordelia ate like she was starving, because she was. Her family's wedding breakfast had been watery tea and stale bread. This was real food, good food, the kind she'd only read about in novels. There was a note beside the plate, heavy paper, masculine handwriting. Library, 9 o'clock, don't be late. Tease. Cordelia looked at the clock on the mantel, 8:30, 30 minutes. She found clothes laid out in the wardrobe. Simple, practical, expensive. A dark blue dress that looked like something a governess might wear, or a lady's companion. Respectable but not ostentatious, perfect for someone who was neither servant nor family, nor quite guest. It fit perfectly, of course. She dressed quickly, found her way through the quarters, only getting lost twice, and arrived at the library at 8:58. The doors were open. Inside was a cathedral to knowledge. Books everywhere, thousands of them, from floor to ceiling, covering every wall, ladders on rails to reach the highest shelves. The smell of leather and paper and old ink, windows letting in morning light that turned the dust motes into gold. The kind of room that whispered that whoever lived here valued knowledge, respected ideas, believed that books mattered. And in the center of it all, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk covered in papers and documents and maps, was Thaddeus Sterling. He looked up when she entered. Different from yesterday. No uniform, no medals, no official trappings, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, vest, simple trousers, hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it while he worked. He looked human, approachable, real. You're punctual. Good. He gestured to a chair across from him. Leather, comfortable looking, placed at an angle that suggested conversation rather than interrogation. Sit. Cordelia sat. The desk was covered in evidence of a man who ran more than just an estate, more than just a state. Letters with official seals, maps with routes marked, documents that probably contained secrets and strategies and the kind of information most people never knew existed. We're going to establish some rules. Thaddeus's tone was businesslike, the voice of a man used to taking charge, used to being obeyed. First, you will address me as Your Excellency in public. Governor Sterling in formal settings. In private, you may call me Thaddeus. I prefer the latter. Titles are useful for maintaining distance and authority, but we're going to be spending a great deal of time together. Distance seems counterproductive. Thaddeus. She tested the name. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate, like a breach of protocol that she didn't fully understand. Second, you will begin lessons immediately. Reading, writing beyond basic literacy, mathematics beyond simple arithmetic, history, political theory, economics, law and strategy. Everything you need to understand how power works in this world, how it's gained, how it's kept, how it's used. I can read and write. Cordelia said it defensively, a reflex. She taught herself mostly, from books borrowed from the lending library, from newspapers discarded in the street. She wasn't ignorant, wasn't some complete blank slate. Farm ledgers and love letters don't count. His expression was stern but not unkind. You need to understand treaties, laws, the games that men in power play, the hidden rules that govern society. You need to be able to walk into a room full of vipers and come out unbitten. Better yet, come out with the vipers working for you. He leaned forward. Why? The question burst out of her, all the confusion and fear and uncertainty from the last 24 hours coalescing into that single word. What do you want from me? Why go through all this? Why not just pay my family's debts and send me home? Why bring me here? Why train me? What's the purpose? What do you gain? I want you to survive. His voice softened, just slightly, just enough that she could hear genuine concern underneath the authority. I want you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, to never be in a position where you have to marry a monster to save your family, to never again be property that can be bought and sold, to have choices, real choices, the kind that only come with education and power and the will to use both. He paused. And yes, there's a practical reason. You're connected to me now. The moment I invoked that blood debt, the moment I took you from that cathedral, you became associated with me in the public eye. People will try to use you to get to me, to gain leverage, to find weaknesses. You need to be smart enough to recognize that when it happens, strong enough to resist it, dangerous enough that they'll think twice before trying. So I'm bait. You're an investment, he corrected, not sharply, just factually. One I intend to see pay off, one I intend to protect. But protection only works if you're capable of protecting yourself when I'm not there. If you understand threats before they materialize. If you can think 3 moves ahead. His eyes met hers, gray and serious and surprisingly kind for all their intensity. I'm going to teach you to be dangerous, Miss Ashworth, whether you want to be or not, because the alternative is watching you end up like Blackthorn's other wives. And I made a promise to your father. I keep my promises. The lessons began that very afternoon. Professor Whitmore from Columbia Law arrived first. A stern man in his mid-50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel scraped over iron. He looked at Cordelia like she was a particularly interesting specimen. A challenge, a problem to be solved. We'll start with the basics. He slid a heavy textbook across the table. Coverture law, property rights, the legal status of women in Massachusetts. You need to understand exactly why you were nearly sold like livestock. And more importantly, how to use the law to ensure it never happens again. To you or to anyone else. Cordelia opened on the book. The pages were dense with text, legal terminology, cases and precedents dating back centuries. The architecture of female oppression laid out in meticulous detail. As she read, something shifted inside her, because here in black and white was the explanation for everything. Every unfairness, every limitation. Every time she'd been told that something was impossible because she was a woman. It wasn't natural, wasn't inevitable, wasn't the way things had to be. It was constructed, designed, intentional. Men had written these laws. Men could change them. Understanding that made her angry. Anger made her focused. She read like she was starving, devouring cases and statutes and arguments, asking questions that made Professor Whitmore's stern expression crack into something that might have been approval. You think like a lawyer, Miss Ashworth, or you will by the time we're finished. Next came Sergeant O'Malley, a bear of a man with scars on his hands and a limp from Gettysburg, gray-haired, barrel-chested. The kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from old oak and brought to life through sheer stubbornness. A woman who can't protect herself is at the mercy of every man stronger than her. His voice was rough, the voice of a man who'd shouted orders over cannon fire and never quite recovered his inside voice. And there's always a man stronger than you, miss. That's just biology. So you learn to be smarter, faster, more vicious. You learn to fight dirty, to fight mean, to fight like someone who has everything to lose. He demonstrated a hold, how to break it, the physics of leverage and momentum, the vulnerable points on the human body, where to strike, how to strike, what to do if you only had one chance and that chance had to count. You're not trying to win a fair fight, he told her as she gasped for breath after her first attempt. You're trying to survive long enough to run, or long enough to grab something sharp. Fair fights are for men with nothing to lose. You have everything to lose, so fight dirty, always. He made her practice until her arms ached, until she could break his grip without thinking, until the movements became muscle memory. Instinct. Better. He grunted approval after she successfully disarmed him for the first time. You might actually survive if someone grabs you now, assuming you remember to aim for the eyes or the groin instead of trying to look pretty while you fight. Madame Beaumont taught etiquette, but not the kind Cordelia expected. Not how to pour tea or curtsy or make polite conversation about the weather. This was different, darker, more useful. Society is a performance, Cherie. The elegant French woman, maybe 60, maybe 80, impossible to tell, poured tea with practiced grace. The men think they're the players. They're wrong. We are the directors. We smile, we nod. We pour tea and look decorative and let them feel superior. And while they're preening, we're memorizing every word, every secret, every weakness, every crack in their armor. She demonstrated proper posture, how to move in a crowded room, how to make an entrance that would be remembered, how to fade into the background when you wanted to observe without being observed. But she also taught Cordelia how to read a room, how to identify alliances and enmities at a glance, how to tell who actually had power and who just pretended, how to navigate social situations like a spy navigating enemy territory. And she taught her how to detect poison. Bitter almonds mean cyanide. A metallic taste is arsenic. Hemlock smells like mouse urine. She said it like she was discussing the proper arrangement of flowers. Men poison women, Miss Ashworth. It's cleaner than beating us to death. It looks like natural causes. Doesn't require physical strength. Can be done with a smile and a toast. You need to know the signs. You need to know when to refuse a drink, when to claim you're not thirsty, when to accidentally spill your wine and apologize profusely while you're actually saving your life. The days blurred together. Mornings with Professor Whitmore dissecting legal codes and finding the loopholes. Afternoons with Sergeant O'Malley learning to turn her body into a weapon. Evenings with Madame Beaumont mastering the art of looking harmless while planning 3 moves ahead. Cordelia absorbed everything like she'd been dying of thirst, like she'd spent her whole life wanting knowledge and only now realized it existed. Could be hers. Could transform her from victim into something else. She learned that contracts could be voided for duress, that a woman's testimony was admissible in court under certain circumstances, that coverture laws had exceptions, loopholes, ways out if you were smart enough to find them. She learned that a thumb to the eye could incapacitate someone twice her size, that the throat was vulnerable, that knees bent backwards if you kicked hard enough, that fighting to escape was different from fighting to win. She learned that society was a chess game, that every conversation had subtext, that information was currency, that knowing when to speak and when to stay silent could be the difference between advancement and destruction. And slowly, carefully, she started to change. Not physically, though her body grew stronger from the training, not her appearance, though Madame Beaumont taught her how to dress and carry herself with intentional grace. But something inside her shifted, hardened, sharpened into something that could cut. She stopped being the girl who would sacrifice herself to save others, started becoming the woman who would find a way to save everyone without destroying herself in the process. The transformation wasn't comfortable, wasn't easy, but it was happening. And through it all, there were the evenings with Thaddeus. It became a ritual. 8 o'clock. The library. 2 glasses of whiskey, proper whiskey, the kind that burned going down and warmed you from the inside. And philosophy. The first evening, Thaddeus handed her a book. John Locke, 2 treatises of government. He settled into the chair across from hers, the one that was becoming her chair, the one positioned so they could see each other clearly, could read expressions, could actually converse instead of performing. Read the section on natural rights, then tell me where he's wrong. Cordelia read. It took her an hour. Thaddeus worked through correspondence while she studied. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the turning of pages and the occasional scratch of his pen on paper. Finally, she looked up. He says all men are created equal, with natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Yes, Thaddeus's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. But he only means men, not women, not slaves, not anyone who isn't a white landowner of a certain class. Go on. So his entire argument is based on a premise he doesn't actually believe, that equality is universal, that these rights are truly natural and inalienable. If he truly believed it, if he actually thought it through, he'd have to acknowledge that women have the same natural rights, that slavery is a violation of natural law, that property rights can't be denied based on gender or race or any other arbitrary category. She met his eyes. He's a hypocrite, a brilliant one. His logic is sound until you apply it consistently. Then it falls apart. He's built an entire philosophy on a foundation he's not willing to examine because doing so would force him to conclusions he'd find uncomfortable. Thaddeus smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him. Not the polite society smile, not the political mask, a genuine expression of pleasure. You think like a philosopher, Cordelia. He used her first name, not Miss Ashworth, Cordelia. Better than most men I know, certainly better than most of the legislators I have to deal with. He raised his glass. Welcome to actual education, where we question everything, especially the things everyone assumes are true. They debated Rousseau the next night. his social contract in whether civilization corrupted natural man or enabled him to reach his potential. Cordelia argued that Rousseau romanticized primitive life without actually understanding what it entailed, that he confused simplicity with virtue. Thaddeus pushed back, made her defend every point, forced her to think beyond surface arguments into the deeper implications. It was exhilarating. Burke came next, his reflections on revolution and whether violent change was ever justified, whether tradition had value beyond mere habit, whether stability was worth preserving even when it perpetuated injustice. Then Kant, categorical imperatives and moral duty, whether people were ends in themselves or means to ends, whether morality could exist without God, whether intention mattered more than outcome. Then Mill, John Stuart Mill, The Subjection of Women. The book Cordelia had read so many times the pages had fallen out. But reading it with Thaddeus was different. He'd actually read it, actually thought about it, actually took it seriously instead of dismissing it as the ravings of a radical. Mill argues that the subjection of women is a relic of barbarism. Cordelia's voice was passionate, animated in a way it never was during the day, that it persists not because it's natural or necessary, but because it benefits men, because tradition and prejudice protect it, because people confuse what is with what should be. And do you agree? Thaddeus's question was genuine, curious, not rhetorical. Of course I agree. I've lived it. I was being sold to pay debts I didn't incur for a family I didn't choose. My education was considered unnecessary. My opinions irrelevant. My purpose to marry well and produce heirs and manage a household, as if I had no other potential, no other value. She leaned forward. Mill is right. The current system treats women as children at best and property at worst. It wastes half of humanity's potential, forces women into narrow roles regardless of aptitude, denies us the right to self-determination that men take for granted. Her eyes flashed. And the worst part is that people genuinely believe it's for our own good, that we're too delicate for politics, too emotional for business, too weak for anything beyond domestic duties. They've built an entire ideology to justify treating us as inferior, and they've convinced themselves it's natural law instead of self-serving prejudice. And what would you change? Everything? The word came out fierce. Property rights, education, access to professions, legal equality, political participation, all of it. Not as favors or exceptions, but as rights, as acknowledgement that women are full human beings with the same capacity for reason and agency as men. Thaddeus listened, really listened, not the polite pretense of attention, real engagement, real consideration. You sound like a revolutionary. Maybe I am. Cordelia hadn't realized it until she said it, but it was true. Something in her had changed, had radicalized, had gone from accepting the world as it was to demanding it be different. Good. Thaddeus's voice was soft, approving. The world needs revolutionaries, especially ones who think clearly, who argue well, who can envision something better and articulate why it matters. He refilled their glasses. But remember, revolution without strategy is just chaos. You need to know not just what you want to change, but how to change it, who your allies are, where the leverage points exist, how to apply pressure without breaking the system so completely that you can't rebuild. Is that what you do as governor? Cordelia was genuinely curious. Navigate between ideal and possible. Every single day, he sighed, suddenly looking tired, older than his 32 years. I have ideals, things I believe should change, but I operate within a system that resists change, that protects the status quo. So I push where I can, make incremental progress, accept compromises I hate because they're better than nothing, and try not to become so cynical that I forget why I wanted power in the first place. Why did you want power? A long pause. He stared into his whiskey like it held answers. Because I watched good people die. At Gettysburg, at a dozen other battles. I watched them follow orders from men who didn't value their lives, who treated them like expendable resources, who made decisions based on politics instead of what was right. His voice was low, remembering. I decided that if people were going to die following orders, those orders should come from someone who actually cared whether they lived. Someone who understood the crowd, someone who would only spend lives when absolutely necessary and would remember every single one spent. He looked up at her. That's why I got into politics, why I became governor, not for wealth or status or any of the usual reasons, but because I thought I could do better than the men making decisions, could cause less harm, could maybe even do some good. And have you? Done good. Some. He gestured at her with his glass. Saving you from Blackthorn, for instance. That was good, necessary, the right thing to do. He paused. Though I'll admit the reasons weren't entirely altruistic. What do you mean? Cordelia felt something shift, a change in the atmosphere, like they were approaching territory he'd been avoiding. Blackthorn isn't just a predator who kills his wives. He's my half-brother, illegitimate, born to my father and a woman who wasn't his wife. I didn't know about him until after my father died, until Blackthorn showed up claiming his share of the inheritance. Thaddeus's hands tightened around his glass. My father left him nothing, acknowledged him in a letter but gave him no money, no property, no legal standing. Blackthorn was furious, humiliated, convinced he deserved half of everything, that his birth was my father's fault and he shouldn't be punished for it. And he might have had a point about the unfairness of it, but his response was to spend the rest of his life trying to destroy me, to take from me, to hurt me in any way he could. Thaddeus's voice went cold, hard. 3 years ago, he met my wife, Isadora. Beautiful, kind, intelligent, daughter of a shipping magnate. We married, fell in love. Real love, not just a political alliance. She got pregnant. Cordelia's breath caught. She knew where this was going, had heard the rumors about Isadora Sterling. But hearing it from Thaddeus was different. Blackthorn had wanted her first. Before I met her, she rejected him, chose me. He never forgave that. When he found out she was pregnant, he did something. What? Cordelia whispered. I don't know exactly. But she died. They said it was suicide. Overdose of laudanum in the West Tower of Blackthorn's estate, where she'd gone to visit because he'd told her he wanted to reconcile, to make peace with me through her. His voice cracked. But I know he killed her. I know it. I just can't prove it. Can't find evidence that would hold up in court. So he walks free, continues his life, marries other women, kills them too. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Cordelia didn't know what else to say. Don't be. Thaddeus looked at her, his eyes wet, raw. Be smart. Be dangerous. Be everything she wasn't allowed to be. That's the only memorial she needs. If you can defend yourself, if you can never be trapped the way she was, then her death meant something, contributed to something good. Something passed between them in that moment. A connection, a recognition. They were both survivors of Ambrose Blackthorn's cruelty, both carrying scars he'd inflicted, both determined to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else. After that night, the conversations changed, became deeper, more personal, less about philosophy and more about the people discussing it. Thaddeus told her about the war, about Gettysburg specifically, about the moment he'd been trapped under that burning wagon, about the drunk soldier who'd pulled him to safety, about the promise he'd made to himself that if he survived, he'd make his life mean something, would honor the men who'd died by living well, by doing good. Cordelia told him about her childhood, about Rosalind's laughter before the sickness, about Jasper's potential being wasted on gambling debts, about her mother's slow transformation from loving to calculating, about her father's descent into bottles and self-pity, about the burden of being the oldest, the one who was supposed to fix everything. They talked about books, about ideas, about the frustration of seeing problems clearly but being powerless to fix them, about the responsibility that came with education, with privilege, with power. And somewhere in those conversations, something shifted. Cordelia stopped seeing Thaddeus as her captor, her guardian, the powerful man who'd disrupted her life and trapped her in a different cage. She started seeing him as a person, complicated, wounded, trying his best in a world that didn't reward trying, carrying burdens he hadn't asked for, making hard choices and living with the consequences. She started seeing him as Thaddeus, not the governor, not his excellency, just Thaddeus. And she suspected he was seeing her differently too, not as the girl he'd rescued, not as the debt he was honoring, not as the student he was teaching, as Cordelia. It scared her, this shift, this change, this feeling that was growing between them, because she'd been so focused on not being Blackthorn's victim that she hadn't stopped to consider what she might become instead. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks into Cordelia's stay at Sterling House. 6 weeks of lessons and training and nightly philosophy debates. 6 weeks of transformation. She was in the library, working through a legal brief Professor Whitmore had assigned. The case involved contract law and the question of whether a woman could be held to an agreement made under duress. It was relevant, very relevant. She was taking notes, arguing with the judges in her head, finding holes in their reasoning. Mrs. Pemberton brought it in on a silver tray. For you, miss. It just arrived. The handwriting was familiar, rough, unsteady, unpracticed. Her mother's handwriting. Cordelia's hands shook as she opened it, because her mother didn't write letters, couldn't afford paper. Couldn't be bothered unless something was seriously wrong. Dearest Cora, we need you to come home. Rosalind is sick again, worse than before. The doctors say she needs medicine we can't afford. Your father has been drinking more. Jasper got into trouble at his new school. Everything is falling apart without you. Strisk, please come home. We need you. Your loving mother. Cordelia read it 3 times. Each time the words seemed to get heavier. More wrong, more off. Because this didn't sound like her mother. Her mother didn't plead, didn't ask, didn't use words like loving or dearest. Her mother demanded, manipulated, calculated. But she didn't beg. And Rosalind was supposed to be getting better. The specialist Thaddeus had sent reported weekly. She was gaining weight. Her cough was improving. Her color was better. She was thriving. Bad news. Thaddeus's voice made her jump. She hadn't heard him enter. My sister. They say she's sick again. Let me see that. He crossed the room, took the letter from her hands. His eyes scanned it quickly, then went dark. Cold. When did your sister last have an episode? 2 weeks ago. You showed me the physician's report. He said she was improving, gaining weight, responding well to treatment. And your brother's school, Jasper's thriving. His headmaster sent a letter last week, said he's at the top of his class, showing real aptitude for mathematics. Thaddeus crushed the letter in his fist. This is bait. What? Your family is in an end crisis. Someone wants you to think they are. Someone wants you to leave the safety of these walls, to step outside my protection, to be vulnerable. He turned to the door, called for Mrs. Pemberton. She appeared instantly, efficient as always. Double the guard on all gates. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. Send word to Dr. Morrison attending the Ashworth family. I want a report within the hour. And send a message to Jasper's headmaster. Verify his status. You can't just lock me in here. Cordelia stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. I can and I will. Thaddeus's voice was steel. Absolute. Until we know what Blackthorn is planning, and this has his fingerprints all over it, you stay where it's safe. My family. Your family's fine. I'll send men to verify, but you don't move until I'm certain this isn't a trap. Until I know that stepping outside these gates won't result in you disappearing. In you ending up in the West Tower after all. In you becoming his 4th wife, whether I can legally stop it or not. He moved closer, his expression intense. You don't understand what he's capable of, Cordelia. What he'll do to get to me. You're leverage now, the most valuable piece on the board. He knows that. And he'll use any method, any lie, any deception to get his hands on you. The verification came within hours. The Ashworth family was perfectly healthy. Rosalind was improving daily. The physicians reported excellent progress. Jasper was indeed at the top of his class, showing remarkable improvement from his troubled past. The family was receiving their stipend. Their debts were cleared. Everything was fine. No one in the household had sent any letter. But more letters came over the following days, each one more desperate than the last. Each one claiming some new disaster. Each one unsigned but in handwriting that almost looked like her mother's, her father's, even Rosalind's childish scrawl. Cora, please. We're starving. The money stopped coming. Daughter, your brother is in jail. They say he killed someone. We need funds for a lawyer. Sister, I'm dying. Please come see me before it's too late. Lies. All of them, but convincing lies. The kind that would work if you didn't have the resources to verify them. If you didn't have the governor of Massachusetts ensuring your family's well-being. Then the incident started. A fire at the market near where the Ashworths lived. No one hurt, but everyone frightened. The kind of fire that looked accidental but probably wasn't. The kind designed to create fear. Uncertainty. A break-in at Jasper's school. Nothing stolen from Jasper specifically, but his classroom ransacked. His belongings scattered. A message that someone was watching. Someone could reach him. A physician trying to visit Rosalind turned away at the door by men claiming to be Sterling's guards. Men who weren't, who were imposters, who were trying to isolate the family, make them vulnerable. Blackthorn was circling, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses, building pressure. Cordelia found Thaddeus in his study late one night. Maps and reports spread across his desk. He looked exhausted, older than his 32 years. The weight of protecting her family running a state, all of it pressing down on shoulders that were strong but not infinite. You can't protect everyone, she said it quietly from the doorway. He looked up, shadows under his eyes. I can try. By keeping me in a cage, by keeping you alive. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at gardens he probably didn't see. At ocean, he probably didn't notice. Blackthorn is escalating, getting bolder. He's not going to stop. If you step outside these walls, he'll take you. And I'll lose you the way I lost Isadora. The way I've lost everyone I couldn't protect. Then let him try. Cordelia moved into the room, stood her ground. Set a trap, use me as bait, end this instead of waiting for him to make his move, instead of just reacting. Take control, use the tactics I've been learning, turn his plan against him. No, the word was final, absolute. The voice of a man who'd made his decision and wouldn't be swayed. Why not? Cordelia's voice rose. I'm tired of hiding. Tired of feeling helpless while he terrorizes innocent people because of me. I've been training for 6 weeks, learning to fight, learning to think strategically, learning to be dangerous. Let me use it. Let me actually do something instead of just sitting here being protected like I'm made of glass. Because I won't risk you. Thaddeus turned, and for the first time his mask cracked completely. I won't lose you the way I lost her. I can't. I already failed once. Already let someone I cared about walk into danger because I thought I could control it. Thought I could protect her from a distance. Thought my power and position would be enough. His voice broke. It wasn't. And she died. And if I lose you too, if I let you walk into danger and something happens, I'll never forgive myself. So no, absolutely not. You stay here where I can protect you, where I know you're safe. The confession hung in the air between them. Someone I cared about. The words echoed in Cordelia's mind, shifted something, changed the equation. This wasn't just about duty, about keeping a promise to her father, about honor and blood debts and legal obligations. Thaddeus cared for her, actually cared, beyond responsibility, beyond guilt, beyond everything except the simple, terrifying fact that he cared what happened to her. And she realized standing there in his study with maps spread between them and the ocean dark beyond the windows that she cared about him too. Not gratitude, not obligation, not the natural warmth towards someone who'd saved her and taught her and given her everything she needed. Something more, something deeper, something that felt like falling and flying all at the same time. I'm not Isidore. Her voice was gentle, certain. I know, and you're not my jailer. You're the man who's teaching me to fight back. The man who believes I'm capable of more than just being saved. The man who respects my mind enough to spend hours debating philosophy with me every night. She stepped closer. So let me fight. Let me help you end this. Not as your ward, not as the girl you rescued, as your partner, your ally, your equal. The last word hung between them, heavy with meaning. If we do this. Thaddeus's resistance was crumbling. She could see it, hear it in his voice. If we even consider this, we do it my way. Controlled. With backup plans for the backup plans. With every possible contingency accounted for. Agreed. When? There's a ball. 3 weeks from now. The governor's winter ball at the State House. Every person of consequence in Massachusetts will be there. Every politician, every merchant, every power broker. All of Boston society gathered in one place. His jaw tightened, including Blackthorne. He'll come because not coming would be noticed, would raise questions, would make him look weak. Then that's where we end this. Cordelia held his gaze, steady, certain. Together, as partners. Partners. He repeated the word like he was testing it, tasting it, deciding if it fit. Equals. Always. The air between them was charged. Electric. Cordelia could feel her heart beating, could see the pulse in Thaddeus's throat, could sense the moment stretching, expanding, becoming something more than just a conversation about strategy. He reached up, slowly, giving her time to step away. She didn't. His hand cupped her cheek. Warm, gentle. The touch of someone who understood how fragile trust was, how easily it could be broken. Cordelia. Her name on his lips was a question. She answered by rising on her toes, by closing the distance between them, by making the choice. The kiss was soft, tentative, like neither of them quite believed it was happening, like they were both afraid that moving too fast would break whatever this was. Then Thaddeus's arms came around her, pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, became something certain, something real, something that felt like coming home and setting out on a journey all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I shouldn't have done that. Thaddeus's voice was rough, raw. Why not? Because you're under my protection, my care. The power dynamic is problematic at best. You're here because I brought you here because you had nowhere else to go. Choosing me might not actually be choice. Is that what you think? Cordelia stepped back, just far enough to look him in the eyes to make sure he understood. That I'm some helpless victim who can't make her own decisions. That I'm so grateful for rescue that I'd confuse gratitude with genuine feeling. That I don't have agency. Number one, I'm not some fragile thing you rescued at Thaddeus. I'm your student. your strategist, the woman you've been teaching to think for herself, to question everything, to recognize manipulation and coercion, to stand up for what I want. She moved closer again. I know the difference between gratitude and attraction, between obligation and choice, between what I should feel and what I actually feel. And what do you actually feel? His voice was barely above a whisper, uncertain in a way she'd never heard from him. I feel like you're the first person who's ever seen me as more than just a daughter or a sister or a potential wife. Like you actually care what I think, what I want, what I could become. She touched his face, mirroring his earlier gesture. I feel like every conversation we have makes me sharper. Like you challenge me to be better. Like you believe I'm capable of more than anyone else ever has. Her voice dropped. I feel like I'm falling in love with you. And I'm choosing that actively, consciously, with full awareness of the power dynamics and the complications and everything else. I'm choosing you, Thaddeus. Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are, because of how you make me feel, because I want to. He kissed her again, this time with certainty, with the kind of intensity that came from holding back for weeks and finally letting go. When he pulled back, his expression was serious, determined. After the ball, after we've dealt with Blackthorn, after you've proven to yourself that you can face danger and come out the other side, after all of that. So, he took her hand. I'll court you properly. No power imbalance, no obligation, no question about whether this is real or just proximity and gratitude. Just two people choosing each other. He squeezed her fingers. If you still want this, want me, I'll be here. I choose you now. Cordelia's voice was steady, certain. I choose this. I choose us. Not after, not eventually. Now, then God help Ambrose Blackthorn. Thaddeus's smile was dangerous, predatory. The smile of a man who'd been pushed too far and was finally pushing back. Because we're going to destroy him together. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Training intensified. But now it had purpose, direction. They weren't just preparing Cordelia to survive. They were preparing her to fight. Professor Whitmore drilled her on legal precedents, contract law, the subtle art of public testimony, how to dismantle an argument with logic and evidence, how to present information in a way that was irrefutable, undeniable, the kind of presentation that left no room for interpretation or spin. You're not just learning law. He told her during one particularly intense session, you're learning how to weaponize it, how to use the system against people who think they control it, how to find the leverage points and apply pressure until something breaks. He showed her how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to connect disparate facts into a coherent narrative, how to anticipate counter-arguments and preemptively destroy them. The law is a weapon, Miss Ashworth, and you're learning to be a sniper. Sergeant O'Malley taught her not just self-defense but offense, how to strike first, how to hurt someone badly enough that they couldn't retaliate, how to end a threat quickly and decisively. But he also taught her restraint, control, how to calibrate force to situation, how to disable without killing, how to defend without becoming the aggressor. You're not a soldier, he reminded her as she practiced combinations. You're a woman in society. You need to be able to defend yourself without looking like you started the fight. Need to be able to hurt someone badly enough to escape without hurting them so badly that you face consequences. It's a narrow line, but you need to walk it. Madame Beaumont showed her how to weaponize charm, how to smile while gathering intelligence, how to make powerful men underestimate her while she was actually 3 moves ahead, how to seem harmless while being absolutely lethal. The greatest weapon a woman has is being underestimated. She said it like gospel. Let them think you're decorative, naive, harmless. And while they were patting themselves on the back for being so clever, you're taking everything they have. And every evening, Thaddeus refined the plan. Blackthorn would try something at the ball. That was certain. He couldn't resist the opportunity. The public spectacle. The chance to humiliate Thaddeus and reclaim Cordelia in front of all of Boston society. So they'd be ready. Cordelia studied Blackthorn's business dealings, found irregularities in his railroad contracts, embezzlement, fraud, bribes paid to state officials, a pattern of corruption spanning years, millions of dollars siphoned from legitimate business into his personal accounts. She compiled evidence, built a case, learned to think like a prosecutor, like someone who understood that destroying Blackthorn meant more than just stopping a wedding, meant dismantling everything he'd built, ensuring he could never hurt anyone again. Meanwhile, Thaddeus reached out to allies, federal marshals he'd served with in the war, judges he'd appointed, newspaper editors who owed him favors. building a net that would close the moment Blackthorn made his move. They worked side by side, partners in strategy and increasingly in everything else. The kiss had changed things, made explicit what had been building for weeks. They didn't hide it anymore, didn't pretend it was just professional, just duty. When they worked late, they worked close, hands brushing as they passed documents, shoulders touching as they bent over maps, small intimacies that felt huge. The attraction between them grew, but Thaddeus held firm to his promise. No more kisses until after the ball, until she was truly free to choose without any shadow of obligation or circumstance, until they'd both proven they could face danger together and come out the other side. It made Cordelia want him more, made every accidental touch electric, made every moment they were alone together feel charged with possibility. 1 week before the ball, a package arrived. Madame Beaumont brought it to Cordelia's rooms with a knowing smile. From Governor Sterling Cherie, for the ball. Inside was a dress. Cordelia lifted it from the box and felt her breath catch. Emerald green silk, cut in the very latest fashion, sleeveless, backless, the kind of dress that made a statement, that demanded attention, that said, I am not prey, I am not victim, I am predator, and you should be afraid. The kind of dress that would make every person in that ballroom look at her and remember. A note was pinned to the bodice. Thaddeus's handwriting. Warriors need armor. This is yours. That evening, Cordelia tried it on. The dress fit like it had been made for her, because of course it had. Thaddeus missed nothing, planned for everything, understood that presentation mattered, that perception shaped reality. She looked at herself in the mirror, barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the frightened girl in the white wedding dress, wasn't the victim being sold to pay debts, wasn't even the student learning to defend herself. This was someone new. Someone forged in libraries and training rooms and late-night philosophy debates. Someone who'd learned to turn knowledge into power and power into justice. Someone dangerous. There was a knock at her door. Come in. Thaddeus entered, stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, he just stared. You're stunning. His voice was rough, raw. The carefully controlled governor stripped away, leaving just the man. I look like I belong in your world. Cordelia turned to face him fully. The dress moved like water, like something alive. You look like you own my world. He crossed to her, stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could see the pulse in his throat, could sense how hard he was working to maintain the distance he'd promised. Cordelia, I need you to understand something. His voice was serious, intent. What we're doing at that ball, it's dangerous. Blackthorn is desperate. Desperate men are unpredictable, capable of things rational men wouldn't consider. If anything goes wrong, it won't. She met his eyes, steady, certain, because we're smarter than him, because we've prepared for every contingency, because we're not doing this alone. We have allies, resources, the law on our side. Her hand found his. We're partners, remember? Partners. He squeezed her fingers, held on like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Equals. Always. 3 more days. His voice was quiet, full of promise. 3 more days and we end this. Together. Together. Cordelia agreed. And neither of them noticed the shadow that passed by her window, the figure that had been watching, waiting, taking notes. Blackthorn knew about the dress, about the plan, about everything, and he had a plan of his own. The governor's winter ball was held at the Massachusetts State House. The building stood on Beacon Hill like a crown on the city's head, gold dome gleaming in the December twilight, windows blazing with light that spilled out onto the snow-covered streets. Carriages lined up for a quarter-mile each one, disgorging guests in their finest clothes. Fur coats and silk gowns and jewelry that cost more than most people would see in a lifetime. Everyone who mattered in Massachusetts would be there tonight, including Senator Ambrose Blackthorn. Cordelia's carriage, Thaddeus's carriage rolled past the others. The sterling crest on the door was like a flag, a declaration. People turned to look, to whisper, to wonder. Is that her, the girl from the cathedral? The one he took from Blackthorn? What's she doing here? What does it mean? Inside, Cordelia sat very still. The emerald dress whispered against her skin with every breath. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken 2 hours. Jewelry at her throat and wrists, sterling family jewels, another statement, sapphires that matched Thaddeus's eyes. You're ready. Thaddeus sat across from her. He wore his formal gubernatorial regalia, dark coat heavy with medals, sash of office across his chest, every inch the powerful man he was. But his eyes were on her, only her, and in them she could see everything he wasn't saying. Fear, hope, determination. Something that might have been love if either of them were brave enough to name it. Emma, Cordelia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. You've prepared for this. You know what to do. You have the evidence, the arguments, the law on your side. He leaned forward, took her hands, steadied them with his own. And you have me, every step of the way. I'll be right there. Won't let you face him alone. Won't let anything happen to you. The carriage stopped. Outside the crowd, noise swelled. Music and laughter and the clink of glasses. The sound of power at play. Of society performing for itself. Thaddeus stepped out first, offered his hand. Cordelia took it, rose, stepped down into a sea of stares. The whisper started immediately. That's her. That's the one. Look at that dress. Look at those jewels. Is she his mistress? His ward? His political advisor? What is she? Thaddeus's hand moved to the small of her back. Steady, grounding, a public declaration that she was under his protection. That anyone who wanted to get to her would have to go through him first. Together, they climbed the steps. The ballroom was magnificent, 3 stories tall with a painted ceiling that depicted Massachusetts's founding. Scenes of pilgrims and revolution and progress, all very noble, all very sanitized, leaving out the parts about stolen land and slavery and women being property. Chandeliers like frozen fireworks hung from the ceiling, walls lined with mirrors that multiplied the crowd into infinity. An orchestra on a raised platform playing Strauss. Dancers already moving across the floor in perfect synchronization. 500 people, maybe more, all dressed in silk and ambition, all watching. Governor Sterling, a portly man, materialized at Thaddeus's elbow. The mayor of Boston, jovial face, sharp eyes, politician's smile. What an honor to have you here. And this must be Miss Ashworth. We've heard so much about her. All good things, I hope. Thaddeus's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath, a warning. Of course, of course. The mayor's eyes slid over Cordelia like she was a curiosity, an exotic pet brought to show. They say she's quite brilliant, quite the political mind, your chief strategist, I hear. She is standing right here. Cordelia's voice cut through the condescension like a knife through silk. And yes, I do have a political mind. I've been studying the new harbor expansion proposal, the one that somehow awards 3 separate contracts to the same company, which interestingly is owned by your brother-in-law. Fascinating coincidence, wouldn't you say, Mayor Thompson? The mayor's face went from jovial to red in seconds. That is, the bidding process was entirely above board. I'm sure it was. Cordelia's smile was all teeth. Just like I'm sure the fact that you received a 5% commission on each contract is entirely legal and proper. Though I wonder what the voters would think if they knew. What the newspapers might say. What kind of investigation the Attorney General might launch. A pleasure speaking with you, Mayor. Thaddeus steered Cordelia away before the man could sputter a response. When they were out of earshot, he leaned close. You're magnificent. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I learn from the best. They moved through the crowd, Thaddeus introducing Cordelia not as his ward, not as someone under his protection, but as his chief political advisor. His strategic partner, his equal. The reactions varied. Some men were dismissive. Women didn't need to understand politics. Some were intrigued. A female advisor was novel, unusual, might be useful. The women were harder to read. Some saw her as a threat, some as an inspiration, some as both. Cordelia didn't care about any of them. She was looking for Blackthorne. He was across the ballroom, standing with a group of lesser nobles, men who owed him money or favors, or both. Men who laughed at his jokes and agreed with his opinions because disagreeing meant consequences. He was thinner than Cordelia remembered. His face had a desperate edge. 3 months of watching his prey slip away. 3 months of humiliation. 3 months of knowing that Thaddeus Sterling had publicly unmade him in front of everyone who mattered. It had worn on him. Their eyes met across the room. His smile was predatory, certain, like he knew something she didn't, like he'd already won and was just waiting for her to realize it. Cordelia felt ice form in her veins, not fear, something colder, harder, more useful, determination. He's here. She kept her voice low, for Thaddeus only. I see him. Thaddeus's hand tightened slightly on her back. Stay close. Don't let him isolate you. Don't accept any drinks unless I've seen them poured. Don't. I know. Cordelia squeezed his arm. I remember everything you taught me. Everything Madame Beaumont warned me about. I'll be careful. The evening progressed. Cordelia danced with various men, made small talk, gathered intelligence. Every conversation was a chess move. Every smile was strategy. She was performing, playing a role. The charming political advisor who was decorative but not threatening, smart but not too smart, useful but not dangerous, all while memorizing every word, every slip, every piece of information that might be useful later. And all the while she felt Blackthorn watching, circling, waiting for his moment. It came at 10 o'clock. The orchestra had just finished a waltz. Cordelia was at the edge of the dance floor accepting a glass of champagne from a servant, one she'd watched pour it, one she'd kept in sight the entire time when the room went quiet. Not gradually, suddenly, like someone had cut the strings on a marionette show. Ambrose Blackthorn stood on the orchestra platform. He'd commandeered it somehow, pushed the musicians aside with the kind of entitlement that assumed the world would rearrange itself for him. He had papers in his hand, a smile on his face, the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. Distinguished guests. His voice carried across the ballroom, pitched for maximum effect. If I might have your attention for just a moment, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information that I believe you all deserve to hear. Information about your beloved Governor Sterling. Thaddeus went very still beside Cordelia, every muscle tensed. Ready. This is it, he murmured. Are you ready? Yes. Blackthorn held up the papers, waved them like flags. These are financial records, ledgers from the Massachusetts Treasury, and they show something quite disturbing. Something that I believe you all have a right to know. He paused for dramatic effect, making sure every eye was on him. Governor Sterling has been embezzling state funds, redirecting money meant for infrastructure, for schools, for public works, redirecting it into his own accounts, to the tune of nearly $100,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers, shock, exactly the reaction Blackthorn wanted. That's a lie. Thaddeus's voice cut through the noise. Clear, certain, absolutely calm. But Blackthorn wasn't finished. He was enjoying this too much, had probably been planning it for months. Is it? Then perhaps you can explain these signatures, these transfer orders, all bearing your name, your excellency. He smiled, triumphant, certain he'd won. Or perhaps your pet advisor can explain them, since she seems to have such a brilliant political mind, such insight into corruption and impropriety. The crowd turned to look at Cordelia, 500 pairs of eyes, judging, waiting, anticipating her humiliation, her failure, the moment when the presumptuous girl would be put in her place. This was the moment, the trap Blackthorn had set, public humiliation, destruction of Thaddeus's career, his reputation, everything he'd built. And Cordelia had one chance to turn it around. She stepped forward. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. She moved with the grace Madame Beaumont had taught her, the confidence Sergeant O'Malley had drilled into her, the absolute certainty that she was right. May I see those documents, Senator? Her voice was clear, steady, carried to every corner of the ballroom without shouting. Blackthorn's smile widened. He thought he'd won, thought he had her trapped. Of course, my dear. Though I'm not sure your 3 months of education will be sufficient to understand them. These are complex financial documents. Not the sort of thing a woman typically. Then it's fortunate I've had excellent teachers. Cordelia climbed the steps to the platform, took the papers from Blackthorn's hands, felt his damp palm, saw the certainty in his eyes, the absolute conviction that he'd destroyed her, destroyed Thaddeus. 1. She studied the documents, her face expressionless, giving nothing away. The crowd waited, breath held, anticipating the moment when she'd have to admit defeat, have to confess that she didn't understand, that Blackthorn was right. That moment never came. These are very interesting, Senator. Cordelia's voice was mild, conversational, like she was discussing the weather. Tell me, do you often present forged documents at social gatherings, or is this a special occasion? The laughter died, the whisper stopped. I beg your pardon. Blackthorn's voice was ice, but underneath she heard it. Fear, uncertainty. These signatures. Cordelia held up the first page, made sure everyone could see it. They're quite good, almost perfect. Someone clearly put a lot of effort into them. But there are 3 errors that give them away. She moved to the second page. First, Governor Sterling's signature uses a very specific flourish on the capital S, a habit from his military days. Every document he signs has it. These signatures don't. They're close, but the flourish is missing. A small detail, but crucial. She could see Blackthorn's face going pale, see him realizing she wasn't bluffing, wasn't guessing, actually knew what she was talking about. Second, these transfer orders reference accounts that didn't exist until 6 months after the dates on these documents, account numbers that weren't assigned until the spring of this year. Yet these documents are dated from last fall, a remarkable feat of temporal manipulation, Senator. or evidence of forgery? I'll let the audience decide which is more likely. Nervous laughter now, uncertain. People starting to realize this wasn't going the way Blackthorn had planned. And third, Cordelia's voice went cold, hard, the voice of someone who'd learned to weaponize truth. The seal on these documents is wrong. This is the old territorial seal. Massachusetts hasn't used it since 1780, over 100 years ago. Governor Sterling would hardly use a seal from before he was born, from before this state even ratified the Constitution. She looked directly at Blackthorn. So either you're presenting century-old forgeries, or you're a liar and a fraud. Which is it, Senator? The ballroom erupted. Blackthorn's face went from pale to red, from confident to desperate. You can't possibly, these are legitimate, I have sources. No. Cordelia's single word cut through his stammering. You have forgeries, poorly executed ones, created by someone who understood finance but not history, who knew how to fake a signature but not how to research the details that would make the forgery believable. She turned to the crowd. These documents wouldn't hold up in any court, wouldn't survive even cursory investigation. They're lies, designed to destroy Governor Sterling's reputation, designed to undermine his authority, designed to create doubt where there should be certainty. She looked back at Blackthorn. The question is why? Why would Senator Blackthorn go to such lengths? Why would he create forged documents and present them at a public ball? What does he gain from destroying Governor Sterling? And since you've made this a public matter, Senator, I believe the public deserves the full truth. Thaddeus climbed the platform, stood beside Cordelia. Together, partners, united. And since my advisor has so eloquently dismantled your forgeries, Blackthorn, I believe it's time to discuss the real crimes. The ones you've actually committed. He gestured to the doors. Federal marshals entered, 6 of them, moving with military precision, fanning out, creating a perimeter. Senator Ambrose Blackthorn. Thaddeus's voice was formal, official, the governor speaking with the full weight of his office. You are under arrest for fraud, for forgery, for embezzlement of funds from your own railroad companies, for conspiracy, and for murder. That last word hung in the air like smoke. Murder. Blackthorn tried to laugh. It came out strangled, desperate. This is ridiculous. You can't prove you have no evidence. This is political persecution. Can't we? Cordelia reached into her bodice, pulled out a folded paper. The room gasped at the impropriety, at the breach of decorum. She didn't care. This is a diary, written by Isadora Sterling, your last victim. She unfolded it, began to read aloud, her voice clear, steady, making sure every word reached every person in that ballroom. May 15th, 1884. Ambrose came to the house today while Thaddeus was in session. Demanded I leave my husband. Said I belonged to him first. Said Thaddeus had stolen me. When I refused, he grabbed my arm, hard enough to bruise. Said if I didn't leave voluntarily, he'd make sure I left permanently. I'm frightened, but I won't abandon my husband. I won't let Ambrose win. Asterisk. Her voice echoed in the silent ballroom. June 3rd, 1884. I'm pregnant. 3 months along. Thaddeus is overjoyed. We're going to have a child, a family, everything I've ever wanted. But I haven't told him about Ambrose's threats. Don't want to worry him during the legislative session. Ambrose came to the yacht today, while Thaddeus was below deck. He knows about the baby. He said if I don't leave Thaddeus, he'll make sure neither of us. The entry stopped mid-sentence. Because that's when you pushed her overboard, wasn't it, Senator? Cordelia's eyes locked on Blackthorn. That's when you murdered her and your unborn nephew. All because you couldn't stand that she chose Thaddeus instead of you. Because your ego was more important than her life, than an innocent child's life, than anything except your own twisted need for revenge. The crowd was silent, horrified, riveted. You can't prove that. Blackthorn's voice was weak, desperate. That diary could be forged, could be fake. You just accused me of forgery. Why should anyone believe this is real? It was authenticated by 3 independent handwriting experts. Thaddeus's voice was quiet, deadly. And we have testimony from the yacht crew, from the servants who heard your threats, from the physician who examined her body and found bruises consistent with being grabbed and forcibly pushed, from the harbor master who saw you leaving the yacht alone, looking panicked, with scratches on your face. He stepped closer. We have everything, Ambrose. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every crime you've committed for the last 20 years. The embezzlement, the fraud, the bribes, and yes, the murders. Because Isadora wasn't the first, was she? Just the most recent. His voice was steel. We have evidence linking you to the deaths of all 3 of your previous wives, patterns, methods, a clear progression from making it look like accidents to making it look like suicide. You got sloppy, overconfident, thought your money and position would protect you forever. They won't. Blackthorn lunged, not at Thaddeus, at Cordelia. He grabbed for her throat, for the diary, for anything, wild, desperate, a cornered animal lashing out. Cordelia moved without thinking, Sergeant O'Malley's training taking over. She twisted, used his momentum against him, sent him stumbling backward into the orchestra platform railing. He caught himself, stood there panting, face red, eyes wild. Touch her again. Thaddeus's voice was a promise of violence. Governor or not law or not, touch her again, and I will end you with my bare hands. The marshals moved in, grabbed Blackthorn's arms, pulled them behind his back, shackled him. You can't do this. His voice was shrill now, all pretense of dignity gone. I'm a senator. I have rights. I have connections. You have nothing. Cordelia's voice cut through his protests. No power, no protection, no future. Just a cell and the knowledge that everyone knows what you are. A murderer, a coward, a man so pathetic that he kills women who reject him, so weak that he can't handle being told no. She leaned closer. Isadora Sterling's last words were probably your name, probably a plea for mercy. Did you give her any? Did you hesitate even for a second? Or did you smile while you pushed her? Blackthorn was dragged away, still shouting, still denying, still certain that somehow his wealth and position would save him. They wouldn't. The ballroom was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Then others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Not for Blackthorn's downfall, for Cordelia, for the performance they just witnessed, for the presumptuous girl who just dismantled a senator in front of Boston's elite. She stood on the platform, in her emerald dress, holding a dead woman's diary, having just destroyed a monster using nothing but intelligence and evidence and the law. She felt nothing, no triumph, no joy, just exhaustion, and the overwhelming desire to leave, to breathe air that wasn't thick with perfume and politics and performance. Thaddeus took her hand. Come with me. He led her through the crowd, out of the ballroom, into a quiet corridor, away from the noise and the stairs and the aftermath. The moment they were alone, Cordelia's legs gave out. Thaddeus caught her, held her up, let her lean against him while she shook. You did it. His voice was soft, full of something that sounded like awe. You were perfect. You were magnificent. I need air. Her voice was shaking. I need to breathe. I need to not be looked at. He led her to a balcony. The December air hit like a slap. Cold, clear, real. Cordelia gulped it down, let it freeze the performance out of her, let it wash away the role she'd been playing. I thought I'd feel better. She said it quietly, honestly. Now that he's caught, now that justice is served, but I just feel empty, hollow, like destroying him didn't actually fix anything. It doesn't. Thaddeus pulled her close, let her lean against him, shared his warmth. Revenge doesn't fill the holes that loss creates. It just stops them from getting deeper, stops more holes from being made. He stroked her hair. But you did something important tonight. You proved that monsters can be stopped. That power isn't absolute. That intelligence and evidence and courage matter. That's worth something, even if it doesn't feel like enough. She looked up at him. Did you feel this way? After Isadora. I felt this way for years. His voice was raw, honest. Until you walked into my library and started arguing about John Locke. Until I remembered what it felt like to want something other than vengeance. Until I found something worth building instead of something worth destroying. He cupped her face. You did that. You reminded me that life exists beyond grief, beyond anger, beyond the need to make bad men pay. What do you want now? His answer was immediate, certain. You. The word was simple, absolute. If you'll have me. Not as your guardian, not as your teacher, as a man who loves you, who wants to spend his life proving that he's worthy of you. Cordelia felt something crack open in her chest, something warm, something real, something that felt like hope. Yes, that's all, she laughed, watery, genuine. What else is there? You saved me. You taught me. You stood beside me while I destroyed a monster. And somewhere in all of that, you became the best thing in my life. The person I want to talk to at the end of every day. The person I want to face the future with. She rose on her toes, kissed him. So yes, 1,000 times yes.